Let me start with one, Peter. You talked very briefly, this is not a trick question, I know Peter's, this is not a trick question, Peter, but you talked briefly about the public domain and private domain. In essence, the U.S. has a lot of research that's done in the public domain, and across the pond in Europe, a lot of the research is done, say, more in the private domain, although that it's not exclusive. So from your perspective, how should we facilitate coordination between the research areas, given the fact that we have one side the public domain, one side the private domain? In other words, what's the path forward to help bridge those differences? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of the research in Europe is still in the public domain, but it's not. It doesn't come so much with the open source or the sharing requirement from the funder. So if you collect data, that does not mean that you have to make the data available, or if you develop a model code, it doesn't need that you put that model code out in the open source area. So I think a lot of that comes to can we get funders in Europe more strongly have them support those open sharing concepts. I think the European Commission nowadays stimulates that very much, and various national governments as well. But one of the main lacking things which we discovered with OpenMI is, okay, you bring it out in the open source, but in Europe they don't know yet that you still need to fund it. If it's an open source, doesn't mean it has become for free. Someone still has to fund it such that it becomes, that it sustains. And I think that is an area where probably expertise from the federal agencies here, who've got a lot of open source funding experience, can help in setting a bit of the agenda in Europe. But even ESA, which used to be always proprietary data, they are putting now data out in the open just for free, because they discover that if they don't do it, people will just use data, which is great. But if everybody shares, so keep doing what you do, because that forces Europe to also do the same.
Yes.
Yeah, I would echo that. Having worked in Europe, there's nothing free in terms of data in Europe, and the question I wanted to ask you though was related to a remark you made at the end, and this is something that's really on EPA's radar, and this is about kind of accessing, having the public input data into whether it's modeling systems or whatever kind of databases from things like cellular phones or whatever. How do you get around the issue of quality control on that? I mean, I think that's got to be a huge issue. Like, where people are collecting the data, the socioeconomic groups that are collecting the data versus those that don't have access to it. There's got to be huge biases in that data source. And how do you get around that whole issue? Like the example you gave for skiing. So okay, what if you have a bunch of people that are focused on one area of a slope that are, sending in all this data on snow depth or snow characteristics related to snow avalanches. There's a whole other area out here where you've got some people that don't care about iPhones that are out there skiing, and they're not sending any data in, and it's much more hazardous. And you're putting out a prediction based on the data that you're getting in that extends to to the whole region, or to the whole ski area, let's say. And it may give a very bad representation of what the hazard is.
I completely agree that for using the information which citizens could provide, our biggest challenge will indeed be how do we make it a coherent quality control picture. And it's not in the report, but maybe it should be added that that we need to put a bit of effort, also put it as one of the goals or the task there of how do you organize the quality control of those contributions you get. Because with the skiing example, indeed, a lot of the organizations at the meeting where I was, they said in the end, well, we can't get a coherent quality controlled picture from it, so let's abandon the idea. Which is, I think, if you're looking at where should we be heading to, it's bad to say let's abandon the idea. It's a great idea. We should look at how can we make it work. But that will be a big challenge.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is Todd DeBolt, or Thomas, I guess is his formal name. And he's the director and in the Project Management Office in the Office of Water for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He has a master's degree in environmental management and a bachelor's degree in environmental science. As the director of the Office of Water's Project Management Office, he is responsible for all information management across the Office of Water. His staff manages the development of applications, models, and software supporting both clean water and the safe drinking water programs. The current project is a national application of SWATS, which is a watershed modeling system to support regulatory, policy, and benefit analysis. Todd is currently co-chairing a task force on hydrologic information sharing for the White House Office of Science and Technology Subcommittee on Water Availability and Quality. And he'll be talking about this task force report out. Todd, we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you. If y'all want to stand up and stretch while I find the slides, please feel free. Or even when I'm talking, feel free, stretch those legs. Let's see here. Okay. Yep. We'll go here. So after our first couple talks, you're going to hear some recurring themes. So that'll give us an opportunity to actually have a dialogue, which will help me accomplish what the Subcommittee on Water Availability and Quality has asked from me and my colleague in USGS, Nate Booth. So a little quick background, OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology, Subcommittee on Water Availability and Quality. That group is co-chaired between EPA and USGS. Jared Bales is the representative from USGS. And one of the things they were asked to do out of a piece of legislation called the Secure Water Act was to produce a report to Congress on water resource availability and some of the science and integration issues that might be facing the agencies as we look towards impacts of climate change. What they discovered when they produced that report was kind of what your group had been charged to do as well. As we look towards some of the future use cases of information and how that supports water policy in the U.S., both quantity and quality, how are we going to be able to integrate our information systems from the NOAA side of things, from the Corps of Engineers, from USGS, from EPA, to make some coherent decisions and predictions on where we may need to take our policy directions. Obviously, when you start looking at those types of systems and the levels of uncertainty that we have there, we're looking at larger volumes of information, integration across systems, everyone that was writing the report recognized integration was one of the challenges that we needed to overcome. Is that a new recommendation? No, it's probably come back. If you were the Egyptians building a pyramid, there was probably integration issues going on between their different engineerings. What's changed, I think, is the expectation of both our constituency on the Hill, within NSF, within some of the White House subcommittees, and most importantly with the American taxpayers on what they expect our research and policy to be driven by. We're all, I'm making the assumption, in this field because we believe that information management and information and models can help inform policy decisions to make, quote, better policy decisions or more informed policy decisions. That's why I actually run a project management office that works on IT application development, is to support policymakers in their decision making. Well, the expectation on the public side right now is that things need to be quicker, right? Everything works in a nanosecond world. Well, our models don't work in a nanosecond world. Some of them do, that's great. Some of them are still works in progress, and in the research community, they better always be works in progress to be refining our science. On the operational side of things, though, for example, a flood forecasting system, citizens don't want to know that the flood that they're watching in their front window is predicted to crest. Well, gee, I can't tell you that because I'm still turning the numbers. You know, they want to turn on the news and know when that flood crest is going to hit their front door. Well, when it comes to some of our policy decisions, we have that same tendency happening. Decisions are being asked of our decision makers to be made quickly and with precisions that may or may not be realistic. But the reality is we have to somehow shorten that time it takes to create an informed decision environment, both for those situational things like flood forecasting and for some longer term things like what is the appropriate set of cropping practices to have on the landscapes that maximizes water availability for downstream uses. Those aren't decisions that you need to make in the nanosecond, but they are things that require high degrees of integration. So one of the task force objectives, very much like yours, is to look at data management and communication protocols and standards to increase the quality and efficiency by which each agency acquires and reports hydroclimatic data. Sounds dry, and sometimes it is. This would be even drier if you want to sit and take the time to read this, but I can tell you right now, these are our charges within this work group that is supported by almost every agency that deals with water resources. Basically, though, as Jared has said, if we take a stab, we write some recommendations, the benefits that come out of this are not what gets put on paper, but in the relationships that we build amongst the communities that are already working on integrated information dissemination, delivery, integrated modeling, for example. For example, I wouldn't be here at this meeting if I hadn't have stumbled across a colleague in EPA who I had worked with 10 years ago on water quality models, who said, hey, wait, you should come. We have this group that talks about modeling and integrated modeling. I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So basically, we're looking at how do we communicate how to increase model efficiency, effectiveness, data publishing, data integration, data interoperability to a very non-technical audience. For those that have had the opportunity to work with groups like OSTP, wonderful, brilliant people. At the end of the day, they're tasked with writing policy recommendations to either the president or other parts of OMB, other parts of the executive branch. When it comes to information management,